Good morning. Psalm 104 paints for us a picture of the greatness and the majesty of God over all creation. It starts like this: Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with light as with a garment, stretching out the heavens like a tent. And as you read through the rest of the psalm, then it sort of reminds you of two things, or at least it reminded me of two things. One, it reminded me of Genesis chapters 1 and 2, the creation of the world and the scope and the sweeping nature of God's creation of all things. It also reminded me of the closing chapters of the book of Job. You remember, Job was a guy who, for God's purposes, was allowed to endure significant amounts of suffering at the hands of Satan. And Job questioned, why? What's going on? God, why are you allowing this to happen? And in a dialogue with God, God doesn't give Job specific reasons for his specific suffering. But what God does do for Job is paint for Job a picture of his greatness and his majesty ruling over all creation. And that's what this psalm does. You go through and you read verse 5. He sets the earth on its foundations so that it should never be moved. Right? We talk about Earth Day, and like, who made the earth? God did. All of it. And he set it exactly where it is in the universe. And then, to the other end, the other extreme, verse 14, you cause the grass to grow for the livestock. So from the great bigness of setting the earth in its orbit and on its foundations to the smallest blade of grass, you have God in control of it all. Now, what is really encouraging to me out of this is, first of all, we need a great God. If we're to have someone to go to in the midst of our suffering and struggle and questions like Job, then we need a God who is great, who actually is powerful enough to not only understand the depth of what we're asking, but whom we can trust to have control over circumstances that we don't have any control over. We need a God like that. The other thing that is incredibly encouraging to me is the psalmist is praying this to God as if, well, not as if, because he has a personal relationship with him. All throughout Psalm 104, he uses covenantal language. And in fact, he even starts the psalm, O Lord my God, with the covenantal name of God, Jehovah. He comes to God in the nature of the covenant, in the nature of a relationship that he has with this great God who created everything. And boy, it's there where we really have our hope, because the king who established the earth's foundations is someone that we can approach and have audience with. John Newton, in his letter about communion with God, says this. He says, the men of the world would account it a high honor and privilege to have an unrestrained liberty of access to an earthly king. In other words, if we have unrestrained access to an earthly king, we would consider that an honor and a privilege. But he says, what words can express the privilege and honor of believers who, whenever they please, have audience of the King of Kings, whose compassion, mercy, and power are, like his majesty, infinite. All right, so Newton's saying two things. This God, who's described in Psalm 104, who is infinite in power and majesty, is also infinite in compassion and mercy. And we have access, whenever we please, to this King of Kings. Now, if that's the case, and if that's true, well, then it leads me to the end of Psalm 104, where he says, I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have being. It leads us to praise and worship. I hope that it does for you today as well. Have a great day.